But seriously, who actually came up with the WD Colors scheme? Because when you think about it, it's just genius. No one done it before, and no one's really emulated it as well since. The idea that there are a range of hard drives and SSDs that are color-coded to their individual need. It's genius. Honestly, I've been making these videos for years, and half the time remembering these model IDs give me a migraine, and then a brand comes along and goes, well, they're all red, they're NAS, aren't they? It's brilliant. I could genuinely kiss them. That's right, today we're going to talk about the WD Red SN700. It's their new NVMe M.2 SSD for network attached storage. Now, if you've purchased a NAS drive in the last few years, there's every possibility that somewhere inside or outside of your device are two little bays, like on the base there, and it allows you to install SSDs into these systems. It allows you to put SSDs to work alongside a bunch of hard drives inside individual bays, which, although larger in capacity and a better price point per terabyte, also come with a much slower overall performance. Even though SATA, which has been around for decades, has the potential for 600 megs of performance, these drives still, at their very best right now, in the current market as available, give you something like 260 to 270 megabytes per second. And there are things happening that are improving upon that performance threshold, but it's still not great. And a lot of people are looking at SSDs. They're looking at SSDs because prices are starting to come down, and they're sort of wondering, well, why don't I just migrate over to SSD there? Of course, SSD doesn't have all the answers. SSD, for example, it is still much more expensive per terabyte. You can't get the same enormous capacity drives without drops in performance and, of course, durability. And durability is a key word in SSDs because hard drives just last longer in terms of their overall workload, whether that is because of the lower performance overall or because of the mechanical parts inside and how the magnetic coils inside work. And SSD caching came along in a big way. It has been around for years and years and years, but it's only in the last 5 or so that we've seen it become so available to home and SMB users, not just big business, that allow you to leverage the performance of 1 or 2 SSDs inside a NAS system, take their high performance in a smaller area and make a hybrid storage area in conjunction with a large number of hard drives in a RAID. Now, it's important there that we talk about where these drives live. Before we talk even more about these drives, because I think before we go into details about their specifications and the prices and what they do, and later in the video where we will be doing individual performance tests and NAS performance tests, wait for that, or fast forward if you choose, but it's worth talking about why this is important, because in 2021, it would be very easily, right now, in September 2021, to look at this drive and go, it's all right, because it's, it's a PCIe Gen 3 drive, and WD, in the last year or so, have released much faster drives than this. They've released bigger drives than this. They've released drives arguably at a lower price point than this. So what makes this drive worth your time? Why should you care about a drive that has come off the back of WD's other releases, which are ostensibly better in their own ways? It's because a lot of people who are accessing data on a NAS are either accessing the same data over and over again, or they are operating backups from multiple sources or pulling data and sharing data from multiple sources to new and existing people in their family or their team members. And a lot of this data doesn't, it's important enough to be frequently accessed, but only a small part of it. And a big pile of that data is archival. It's warm storage at best. And this is where SSD cache lives. It improves the performance of data being accessed or data being written to a NAS, sometimes one more than the other or both together depending on the setup. And it's been a few years now that we've seen brands like WD and others take to the market with SSDs that are geared towards this utility. All the other SSDs that I was highlighting there, your WD Black, stuff like that, these drives, they give you incredible performance, but their durability isn't as strong. And once you start, accessing data from them in the way that a NAS requires data to be interacted with, in terms of cache at least, with a huge recycled data methodology, the result is that those drives are no longer suitable. And just like the fact that you've got multiple spoons and knives and forks in the drawer, it's better to have a tool for the job at hand. Now, this is the WD Red SN700. It's available in 5 different capacities, from 250 gig all the way up to 4 TB, with 501 and 2 TB there in the middle. It is a PCIe Gen 3x4 SSD. Now, this is something I think that is worth discussing, because right now we are living in a world with a lot, and I mean a lot, of PCIe Gen 4, while I'm breaking the scenery behind me, PCIe Gen 4 SSDs there. Now, PCIe Gen 4 SSDs are super fast, but the majority of NAS systems aren't embracing PCIe Gen 4 just yet. And indeed, although it's becoming a little bit more available in desktop PCs and indeed PS5 for the recent videos you may have followed, the result still is that in terms of network attached storage, PCIe Gen 4 isn't quite there yet. And you can tell that WD have looked at this and gone, do you know what? We'll stick with PCIe Gen 3x4. And they have, to their credit, controlled the price there. The price is a pinch higher, I would say, than your atypical PCIe Gen 3x4 SSD right now. But it's not much higher. And for the durability you're getting back, which again reported on these drives, again we can talk about terabytes written later on, but in terms of drive writes per day, the 250, 500 gig and 1 TB drive all rate at a 1.0 drive writes per day. That means that this drive can have its entire capacity recycled in data daily and still maintain that performance and still be within its 5-year warranty. So again, that's a big key point there. The 2 TB and the 4 TB are a pinch lower at 0.7 drive writes per day, but that is still particularly high for a drive. And again, the chances are that when you are utilizing caching, don't think of it as memory, which is just flushed every time the system is powered down or rebooted, or when operations are ceased and other new ones are started. Caching is a more long-term kind of fast-acting storage there, working in conjunction with the main storage system on your NAS. And a lot of people have been demanding, not waiting, demanding for WD to release an NVMe SSD. They've already had SATA equivalents in a SATA SSD here in the WD Red series, in the SA500, and a 2.5 SATA there. This is their first NVMe NAS drive. So again, people have been waiting for this. Maybe a pinch later they've brought this to the market than they should have, but still there have been shortages. There's been all kinds of stuff in the last 18 months. I don't know if you've noticed, but still nonetheless, this is it. So let's have a look at this drive. I think this is the one that's already open. Have a look inside. Both of these drives will be inside both the Synology and QNAP NAS system later in the video. Inside, we've got our first time setup instructions. And again, setup instructions are incredibly limited. Just stick it inside a system. They're going to have to be generic about it. Also inside, there's information on your 5-year warranty. Do bear in mind when I mention about the drive writes per day, and particularly the terabytes written later on, it's worth highlighting that, remember, these drives, although they arrive with a 5-year warranty, modern SSD manufacturers will hold you to that workload. So if you send it in for a warranty because the drive stopped working or the performance has dipped significantly and you're still in that 5-year period, they will check the controller inside to see what the drive activity has been, how many hours powered on, and more. So do keep an eye on that drive writes. It's not, vital, but do bear in mind, if you are constantly battering this drive, I'm talking to you, Chia people, then chances are that it's worth keeping an eye on that, the drive writes per day and terabytes written rating. So there is our drive there. This is the 1 TB model. We'll bring that nice and close there. We'll get the thumbnail. There we go. And if we have a look at that label underneath, we can take a little look at the hardware components. So again, don't remove labels, to be perfectly honest. One, it doesn't make any difference in modern SSDs these days, but also you can invalidate your warranty sometimes. So it's a lovely, neat layout. This 1 TB is blank there on the back of the drive. And on the top there, we've got 2 NAND modules there at either end of the drive. Let's put that back there. At either end of the drive, top and tail, they are 3D TLC NAND there, and that's Sandisk NAND, two blocks of 512 gigabytes there. So there's a little bit of OP there as well built in to put that in at the 1 TB mark there. The controller is an in-house NVMe. It's part of this 700 series, and again, that is a PCIe Gen 3 controller. We've seen a similar controller, or in the same controller in some cases, in the likes of older Gen Black series and the WD Blue series. They have evolved that controller over time. It is a good PCIe Gen 3x4 controller. Also, the NAND on side, that SD-RAM scales with each capacity there. And again, you've got a lovely little block there. And even a power management controller chip there. I don't know how well you're going to make that out. You can see it just flickering there slightly in the light. That little power controller there, again, quite handy indeed. So the drive there isn't a heatsink. That's one thing that I think gets overlooked a little bit in network attached storage use, given that we're seeing a lot of SSDs are arriving on the market, indeed even their own WD Black series with a heatsink bang on board. They've got one of the best heatsinks out there in the market. It always surprises me when brands that produce SSDs predominantly for network attached storage don't do too much with heatsinks. A lot of NAS brands, and again, your Synologies, your QNAPs, your Asus, your whatever, they generally arrive with either heatsink panels or thermal pads or kind of surround panels that can go on NVMe's. But it's still so surprising me that there isn't even a thermal pad inside this box. So again, if you are going to put this inside your system, double check you've either got those small little heatsink components that NAS brands sometimes arrive with to pop on the controller, or double check that you've got something in place. Don't just slam one of these in your system and hope for the best. You should really have some form of thermal kind of heat dissipation on these, because not only are they going to be on for a while, but cached drives are active a great deal more than general pick up and play drives. Now, the terabytes written rate on these drives, again, scales with each one. I mentioned about the drive writes per day. So, for example, the 250 gig drive has a 500 terabytes written. The 500 gig drive has a 1000 terabytes written. And it's not until you get to the 2 and the 4 TB where things drop ever so slightly. But the highest there on the 4 TB at 5100 terabytes written within its lifespan. Now, performance on these drives, again, you've got to think about the utility. You're not going to be utilizing this for gaming. You're not going to be utilizing this for your OS or your editing. You're going to be utilizing this drive within a NAS system in conjunction with drives. And a lot of these systems that have NVMe slots on them, although they're there, not all NAS brands allow you to use it for raw storage. So when we talk about these benchmarks, and we will be bench testing this drive on the usual suspects, Atto, AS Disk, Crystal Disk, all of those things, we will be doing that in a moment. But it's worth highlighting that WD themselves volunteered at the lower end, at the 500 gig. They reported a 3100 megabytes per second sequential read and 1600 megabytes per second sequential write. But again, that is the lowest. If we scale all the way to the top, it reaches the heights of 3400 megabytes per second sequential read and 3100 megabytes per second sequential write. And yes, I had to check my notes there for a second. Did you catch me? IOPS, though, are where things are very important on a drive like this, because unlike a lot of PCIe Gen 4 SSDs that we've talked about here on the channel in the last few weeks, a lot of those drives have had IOPS ratings of between 350 and maybe 500 to 600,000, to around 600 to 650,000 IOPS. Now, it's worth highlighting that this drive needs to have good IOPS ratings. It's still going to be within the confines of PCIe Gen 3x4, but it needs to have good IOPS, because chances are if you're utilizing it in standard I/O cache and you're not using it for, say, tiered storage, something we will touch on later on, and you're not going to be utilizing it for big, multimedia pass-through, if you're using it as write-through or write-back cache, depending on your setup, then chances are that the IOPS you are going to need are going to have to be notable. And I'm pleased to say in the case of this drive, things do tick quite well for the very top end, rated at 550,000 read IOPS over 520,000 write IOPS there. So again, these are your 4K, your small files, and that is where your SSD cache is going to be very important to live there. Now, I would talk about mean time between failure, MTTF. Again, it's 1.75 million, but not a lot of people utilize that these days. I think before we go to the testing, it is of course worth highlighting we will be making direct comparisons soon with the likes of the Seagate Iron Wolf. They've already had an NVMe out for a while, but it is arguable that although the durability is the same as this, their performance isn't. So it's going to be interesting to see how these two compare in a NAS-based environment. Something we will be testing on later on, the 510 versus the SN700 series. I will also highlight with regards to these drives that if you are going to utilize a drive like this in a NAS system that allows for raw storage, pools, volumes, that sort of thing. Again, QNAP are a big supporter of this, allowing people to not only take advantage of about 5 or 6 different kinds of caching technique and tiered storage, but on top of that, allowing you to just use SSDs like this for NAS that are going to be on 24/7 as raw storage pools and volumes. And in that arena, this is a very good drive, taking the lion's share of the bandwidth possible in PCIe Gen 3x4, saturating it quite well. That's why we're going to be looking at those benchmarks on this drive in a standalone environment alongside testing it in a NAS, because a lot of you are going to look at a drive like this in the likes of a triple tier QNAP system like the 82 series or the 72 series like that, or the 88X series, and you're going to be wondering about having 2 or 3 tiers of different storage areas for different projects on the go, taking advantage of fiber, 20 GBE, 40 GBE, Thunderbolt, 10 GBE and more. So do check those out. But for now, let's get this drive slammed inside the test rig and then inside the NAS and have a look at what it can do. Right, so here I am on the desktop here. We've got the drive already installed, the WD Red SN700, that 1TB drive, and we're going to perform some tests, but a few things straight off the bat. First and foremost, in the background, I have 2 NASs in close proximity, a Synology and a QNAP, both of which are going to be used in the SSD caching testing. They're just in the final stages of moving some data around. Consequently, I can't really remove them from the sound. So there's a little bit of background noise on this recording. I apologise for this part. It will be better later on. The next thing I want to highlight is the tests I'm going to be running today are quite diverse. I'm going to be taking advantage of Crystal Disk Benchmark. Ignore the black screen, that's just as things open. I'm going to do 3 tests on Crystal Disk. I'm going to do 3 tests on Atto Disk Benchmark. I'm going to do 3 tests on SSD. Ignore that black screen again, that's just Windows telling me the warning. And I'm going to do a brief test on AJA as well, though AJA isn't really going to be the suitable pick for at least this stage of the testing. Now, removing all of those there, we'll have a little look. We can see, if we get rid of them, this drive is listed. It's being seen as a PCIe 3x4. There's no bottleneck. It's NVMe 1.3. And again, we will be doing some temperature tests later on as well. We can check out that as it goes. We've got it inside the LU10 heatsink that we've used in other tests. The Windows machine, it's a Windows 10 Pro machine using an 11th Gen 6-core i5 processor with 16 gig of memory. No GPU card inside. And again, we aren't going to do any of the recording with the screen recording here in place. I'm going to close the screen recording software, run the test and go through the results with you. One, because they'll take forever to show you, but also because without using an external GPU card, it can impact the result to the tiniest bit. So take my word for it, we will run the test. I'll show you the results in just a moment. But again, even if I tried to run AJA right now on this drive, we wouldn't see anywhere near the results that we're going to see later on. So again, just worth highlighting that, but for now I'm going to start setting up for these tests and bring you back once they've been completed. Let's fast forward to the results. Okay, so testing has concluded here for the benchmark on the WD Red SN700. It's worth highlighting just quickly off the bat, I did conduct 2 ranges of tests on this drive, and if we go into the benchmark, we can quickly have a look at the temperature there. As you can see, these are the tests on the left hand side of the screen that were conducted at the end of the 22nd of September, and the retesting here that took place here on the 23rd. Again, left it overnight. The test, as you can see, fairly consistent. The heights there reaching a high of around 59 at the very top there. That was during the Atto Disk Benchmark testing. So again, something to look at there throughout. So at the moment, the drive is sitting there at 41C. The last test was conducted around 6 or 7 minutes ago. And let's go through those results. So first and foremost, let's look at Crystal Disk. We've got 3 different test regimens there. We've got a 1 gig, 4 gig and 16 gig. And as you can see, the read right there comfortably in the 3000. It dipped ever so slightly at the biggest one there. And what I did notice throughout this test, and again I'm going to touch on this more towards the end, is that how quickly that cache was fully saturated on the drive. Now again, that's not uncommon on SSDs and particularly PCIe Gen 3x4 drives, but again, this does kind of hurt some of the results later on. This is no fault of the drive itself, and it's actually a great deal clearer if we look at the AJA test results here. So if we look at these three, I bring them up and I'll try and get them all on screen. You notice that with the smaller test files, like the 4 gig there, again, writes nice and comfortably there, breaking into the 3000s. And as you can see, the results there in the high 2000s there. But AJA is a tough one to bench test on. And as you can see there, with the 16 gig test, the drive saturation drop there as it went through did impinge those results a little bit. It still performed exactly how I'd like it to see it, a drive like this in AJA, and I'm quite pleased with these direct performance results, even though this drive is of course designed for network attached storage. Now if we move away from the AJA test results there and move on to Atto Disk Benchmark, again, 3 separate file size tests there. Let's get rid of that. We've got the 256 meg file, the 1 gig and the 4 gig test file, and again, breaking into, in terms of those reads, consistently at the larger file sizes there into 3000s comfortably, peaking I believe at somewhere around the 320 there, so 3200 there was there at the peak. So again, lovely numbers there, quite consistent, exactly what I would have liked to have seen. If we go to IOPS, of course, it's very hard to gauge these IOPS on these file sizes, because really with IOPS we would be looking at 4K, incredibly small file sizes. But again, we're not benchmarking IO here in this part of the video. So again, from there we can make our way into AS SSD, and again AS SSD a little bit more of a stricter tool generally, but nonetheless we did see it break in terms of read consistently into the 3000. Actually, I say consistently, very close there, with the write sitting at 2,500 quite easily on all of them. But again, do bear in mind it's a little bit more of a stricter tool, AS SSD, than the likes of we've seen in Crystal Disk. If we once again put those side by side there, we can see that those performance figures are still pretty good, even for both of them, strict or not strict. Even the mixed load was still pretty good, with the IOPS there on 4K being reported at a nice comfortable margin on all 3 of the Crystal Disk tests there all the way through. So again, that's how things are sitting on a single disk benchmark there. We're going to move over to the NAS now and do some NAS based testing. So for the caching test, I looked at a Synology DS1621 Plus. Now this NAS has a couple of NVMe SSD slots on board. We populated both of these slots with a WD Red SN700 SSD, and we utilized this for an area of caching, read-write caching I should say, with 2 8TB Synology hard drives. We were originally going to go with WD Red hard drives, but I decided just to remove WD Red from the hard drive equation so we can concentrate on these SSDs. Now, with this SHR array here, so kind of like a RAID 1, we were accessing the NAS device via 1 gigabit Ethernet via the same machine that we use for the desktop tests. Now, we created a 1 terabyte iSCSI LUN on the RAID 1 or SHR hard drive array, and we conducted every test twice. So the first test was the one conducted without any SSD caching, so the WD Red SSDs were not involved at all. And in the second test, we would add the 2 SSDs to be used for caching on the system. Now, this test heavily prioritized write caching, although we are using read and write testing caching in this test. It's worth highlighting that in this particular Windows transfer test, write really was key here. So we were uploading 3 gigabytes of data over 1 GBE to the NAS, but they comprised of over 44,000 individual files. 24,000 of those files were fairly regular files, images, docs, that sort of thing, and the rest of it was metadata, incredibly small files, around 20,000 of those, and transferring them over. Again, carrying them over 1 gigabit Ethernet, first time without cache, second time with cache. And the difference was actually quite significant thanks to that write cache and that heavy write rating on this particular SSD. The whole process took just under 10 minutes without write caching, and with write caching, a noticeable difference there at 6 minutes 45 seconds. There's a margin of error there of around 5 to 10 seconds due to pop-ups happening early doors, but again, a significant improvement there in terms of write caching during that transfer test. Next up, we utilised both Atto Disk Benchmark and Crystal Disk Mark in order to get some measurements on the performance of this NAS with and without SSD caching. If we look at Atto Disk Benchmark first, we can see that the write performance overall was a pinch better there on the cache-enabled system, and a lot of that, of course, is what we expected. Read, on the other hand, however, was only fractionally better in some ways, and of course, caching takes time for the system to learn what are the most important recurrent files, so it's very hard to measure. If we look at Crystal Disk, we can see between the two of them that again, there were tiny improvements on the write performance between the two of them, with mixed performance being somewhat of a controversial bag there, as again we were utilising 1 gigabit Ethernet here. And if we look at both of them in terms of read, we can clearly see the difference being absolutely minor between them. And again, that's due to the read caching taking a great deal more time to kind of learn as it goes. Next up, we looked at IOPS performance utilising Atto Disk Benchmark and AS SSD. In Atto, we looked at 1 GB and 64 KB instances, and AS we used the default settings. As you can see, again, write performance was on the whole better with cache, and AS SSD particularly noticing improvements as file sizes got smaller. A lot of that is where caching truly does thrive. And overall on the Synology system with caching utilising that same 1 TB LUN that were activating and accessing over 1 gigabit Ethernet, the results were pretty good and, in some cases surpassed what I thought they'd be. Moving over to the QNAP now, and what we did here is take advantage of the TVS 872X. We interacted with the device over 10 gigabit Ethernet, but it was a shared network connection to keep things fair. We took the two 1 TB WD Red SN700s and placed them in a RAID 1 environment, then created a storage pool within that environment, and on top of that a volume, but more appropriately we created another LUN. This LUN I limited to 700 gigabytes rather than utilising the full 1 TB potential that was there in accordance with shared access and utilisation. Now, the first test was in AJA, and of course in this setup we've created, we're not going to be able to fully saturate the 10 GBE. Even if we utilise the full available space in a non-shared environment, it has to be bared in mind that this system takes advantage of PCIe Gen 3x2 slots rather than 3x4, so there will be bottlenecks regardless. Nevertheless, looking at AJA here, we still comfortably hit a consistent 600 to 700 megabytes per second on these SSDs, which I know a number of you, after looking at the numbers in the thousands of our early benchmarks, may be a bit disappointed. Take my word for it, for this test setup at both 256 megabytes and 16 gigabytes, this is exactly what I would expect. Now, if we look at the Atto Disk Benchmark score, looking at throughput, once again taking advantage of that LUN that's been placed on that storage pool of SSDs, we can see a fairly consistent through line where we are consistently hitting 600 to 700 megabytes per second on every rotation in both read and write, with the bottleneck of course being the way we've set up these tests and the shared 10 GBE nature of this network to show that it can still saturate within those environments. If we move over to IOPS, we can see that these drives hit a fairly early consistent 10 to 15,000 early doors, and throughout the Atto Disk Benchmark scoring there, be it from as little as 256 meg all the way up to 4 gigabytes, we still saw very good scores all round within context. That's going to be incredibly important to look at these results within their own context, and although these tests don't match that of the 3,000 to 4,000 maximum of these benchmarks early on in the single PC use, within NAS utilisation, and if we were using just one single drive for different users and sharing the hard drives and SSD utilisation on this system, you'd still see great performance. And overall, throughout all these tests, I can comfortably say that these SN700 drives are giving exactly what WD promised. Let's get to the conclusion. So, what did we think? What do we think of WD Red's first NVMe SSD for NAS? I think it's fair to say that it performed quite well in all of our testing. It did exactly what it said it would, and it lived up to its own claims. Things that I like about this drive, first and foremost, I know it's a silly thing to say, I really like that it's available in a whole bunch of capacities. So many people, when populating network attached storage devices like this, and indeed rack mount ones as well, are a little bit unclear about the capacities they need to go for. Generally, I will always recommend around 10% of the overall hard drive storage area you should have in SSD caching, whether it's in a RAID or not. But when it comes to getting all the tiers available, going as low as 250 gig and then 500, then 1 TB, 2 TB and 4 TB, I think it's quite forward thinking. They could have got away with ignoring one half of that and gone very small or very big. Another thing that I really liked about it is that durability. A lot of releases from WD in the last year or so have been, pretty impressive, particularly their NVMe ones. But durability, terabytes, written drive writes per day, whatever you want to use to describe it, I always thought they took their foot a little bit off the gas there, concentrating on performance a little bit more than the durability, with a lot of their drives knocking around with 0.3, 0.4 drive writes per day. These drives arriving with 0.7 to 1.0 drive writes per day, for me, shows that they are taking this seriously as a drive that's going to be utilized in a network attached storage area. And of course, the fact that not only do these drives thrive in a standard storage pool environment with volumes and more, and not just in a caching capacity, is very, very impressive, particularly when we talked before about Synology's own SSD, their NVMe they released for their systems, and their systems can only utilize them for cache. So having a drive that thrives as both a caching drive and as one that can be utilized as raw storage within 24/7 utilization is not to be sniffed at. Now, of course, it's not all good. First and foremost, it is a little pricey for a Gen 3 drive, and if you're coming at this drive looking at it, comparing it against your SN750s from WD, the previous generation black, you're going to look at it and go, well, that's actually quite expensive for what feels like an older gen drive. You've got to look at it as a NAS SSD in the arena that it's being used within, and therefore within that scope. And of course, that 24/7 utilization and constant bombardment of activity that goes on it. Again, another criticism, the fact it's kind of arrived very late to the party. We've already talked about their SATA SSDs have been knocking around for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. It seems weird to me that it's taken them this long to come out with a NAS-based SSD, whether it's shortages or not. I'm sorry, it is quite late, isn't it, WD? What is the reason for that? And finally, a lack of a proprietary heatsink option for me is a little underwhelming. I kind of assumed they would come up with something, because in the past they've done some great work with heatsinks on their drives. It's not the be-all end-all. Most NAS providers, be they ones that arrive with an NVMe SSD arrangement of slots available or PCIe upgrade cards available, whichever way you look at it, they always have options, be they in cards that have got heatsinks attached or upgrade cards that have whole cooling arrays in place. So not having a heatsink isn't necessarily the end of the world. I would say overall, this is a good SSD for NAS, and I would recommend it, particularly in conjunction with WD Red drives, of course, but I would definitely recommend it irrespective of that. Yes, it isn't going to blow you away, but it's not designed to blow you away. A butter knife isn't designed to cut a steak very well. It is designed to spread butter. And with this drive, you can tell it's been designed for long-term utilization, to be on for a great deal of time. And with that in mind, they've definitely achieved what they set out to do. But this has been my review and testing and benchmark and more of the SN700 WD Red SSD. If you want to learn more about this drive, there is, while I knock that over, a review in the description below, linked down there. If you've enjoyed the video, click like. It helps me understand what you guys like and what to cover in future videos. If you enjoyed the video and you want to learn more, click subscribe or click the bell to be notified. I talk about a lot of things to do with data storage, but let's be honest, NAS has always been a very close to my heart subject. And of course, take advantage of the free advice section over on NAS Compares. It's a genuinely free service manned by me and Eddie the Web Guy, helping anyone that needs data storage advice that can't afford it. Just go there, ask your question. It's unbiased, it's manned by two humans. It might take us a day or two to reply. There's donate buttons, use them, ignore them, it's up to you. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.